When I was a kid, my favorite movie of all time was the Disney movie Mulan. This was when movies were still in VHS tape form. I watched Mulan so many times that I broke the tape from rewinding and rewatching it too many times. And to this day, my family still brings up how much I love that movie. Now, was it because I really resonated with her character in the story? I don't think so. But I think a large part of the reason I held on to Mulan so tightly was because she was the only East Asian character I can remember seeing on TV. In recent years, and especially after the killing of George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement last summer, there have been rightful calls to diversify many spaces. One of the most important ones that has been identified is children's media. But why exactly is diversity and representation important in children's media? Well, children's television can have society-wide ramifications that can be explained through two theories: cultivation theory and social learning theory. Cultivation theory states that media influences viewers' perceptions and thoughts, and that this media content is cultivated by the viewer as reality. So in other words, what you see on screen influences how you think and how you perceive the world and other people. Social learning theory views television as a primary influence in the development of children's socialization skills. So it emphasizes observing and then modeling the behaviors and attitudes of other people, particularly people you identify with. So what that means is if you see someone on screen that you identify with, you're more likely to model their behavior in real life. And these theories are important because sometimes television shows are the first time that children are introduced to a person who comes from a different socioeconomic or cultural background from them. For children who don't live in diverse communities or don't have the opportunity to interact with people who are different from them, television is a powerful tool to learn about and experience different people. Unfortunately, characters of color are often heavily stereotyped and portrayed negatively. And this is where cultivation theory and social learning theory come into play. These two theories predict that what children learn about that character on screen can shape the beliefs and influence how they behave towards that group of people in real life. So when children see people of color being portrayed negatively on screen, they're more likely to think negatively about that group of people in real life. And the effects of this may seem minimal, but it can lead to discrimination and unconscious bias. However, it's not just about negative portrayals, but the mere number of them as well. As of 2020, the US population is roughly 60% white and 40% people of color. Of the 40%, 12.5% are Black and 19% are Hispanic. Now let's look at the US population through the lens of children's media. A study that looked at some of the most popular animated children's television shows analyzed 1,500 characters. In their survey, they found that less than 10% of characters were people of color. Of that 10%, 5.6% of characters were Black and 1.4% were Hispanic. This is a problem because children lose the opportunity to see people with their identities being portrayed. It can communicate a message that they do not belong to or cannot be successful members of our society. Furthermore, if the few portrayals that they do see of people like themselves are negative and stereotyped, this means that they're cultivating and learning from these negative images, which poses an issue with their self-esteem. Research has shown that lower self-esteem is correlated with poor mental health and student motivation, academic achievement, and may even lead to health-compromising behaviors like alcohol abuse or disordered eating. But what is being done about this problem? In recent years, children's media has made steps to increase diversity in shows and talk about race with children. However, what mostly happens in children's shows when addressing diversity and equity is that the message becomes some variation of, we may be different, but in the end, we are all equal. And you've probably heard a similar version of it before, something like, we have different skin colors, but underneath that, we are all human. Anything like that. And that message is a start. but I'm proposing that children's media go even deeper. There's a conception that tough topics like race or colonization shouldn't be touched by children's media. That somehow a kid's innocence will be ruined if we talked about the not-so-pretty aspects of our history and our society. But there are ways to highlight and uplift certain cultures and people that we don't talk about, that is never addressed in schools, without quote-unquote ruining children's innocence. I had the opportunity to witness what this could look like when I interned on a PBS show called Molly of Denali last semester, which is actually produced right here in Boston. The show is about 10-year-old Alaska Native girl Molly, who explores Alaska with her best friends and her dog Suki. She is the very first Indigenous main character on a children's broadcast television series since the birth of broadcast television almost 100 years ago. The content dives deep into Alaska Native culture. Molly talks about Alaska Natives who inspire her, like Walter Harper, the first person to reach the summit of Denali, the highest mountain peak in North America. She shows the audience their way of life living in rural Alaska and incorporates Native words into her dialogue. She talks about her culture through learning about elders' Native names or training for the Native Youth Olympics, and showcases Native foods and recipes. This model of diversity is so different from what we usually see in shows. But what is so significant about Molly of Denali is that this show doesn't just feature Native people on screen, but off screen as well. GBH, the PBS station from Massachusetts who produces the show, has hired over 60 Alaska Natives to work on the show in various capacities. Alaska Native producers are part of the production team to guide the direction of the show and are involved in every important decision. GBH obtained funding to train Indigenous writers on screenwriting, specifically for animation, to write for the show. They also hosted a voice acting workshop for Native children and have Indigenous voice actors for every Indigenous character on the show. They've sought out cultural and language advisors for every single culture that they touch upon, who look at everything from scripts and animation to educational curriculum, games, and social media to ensure that the content is authentic and respectful. And this commitment to getting it right and being authentic and respectful has resulted in overwhelming and positive feedback. Adults leave comments and messages on social media talking about how amazing it is to see their own culture on screen. They reflect on how watching the show moves them to tears because they didn't realize how much not seeing themselves growing up had impacted them. There's an episode called Grandpa's Drum, in which Molly's grandpa doesn't sing Native songs anymore since his childhood drum was taken away from him when he was sent to boarding school where Native language and customs were forbidden. Molly tracks down his childhood drum and returns it to him and helps him find his songs again. After this episode aired, we got messages from Alaska Natives sharing stories about their own family members going through this and how much they connected to this story. And this is just one example of how tough topics like boarding school history in Alaska and forced assimilation can be discussed in children's media. My favorite feedback of all time is this photo of a little girl, Ella, with her dog, Yuki, posed next to Molly and her dog, Suki. I'm not saying that Molly of Denali does everything perfectly, but I think it is an example of how this type of representation is so important. For children to know that their stories matter, and for other children to learn about it. Molly of Denali isn't the only show that does this. What have we seen from other diverse media? They are a resounding success. Think about movies like Black Panther or Coco, and how widely successful they have been. Black Panther is the highest grossing superhero film in the US. It boasts Marvel's first Black director and an almost entirely Black lead cast. Think about Coco. It was the biggest box office hit in Mexico. And part of Coco's success lies in how much it resonated with families of Mexican descent. Not only are children and adults looking for diverse movies, but they're craving it. And this is the first domino towards creating a more understanding, empathetic, and open-minded world. Ultimately, it's not about how television impacts us, but what we choose to do with television. So be mindful of what you consume. Look for diverse and inclusive shows and support these shows with your views. It encourages the field to continue to shift the direction of children's media and media in general towards inclusivity and meaningful representation. If we can create this world for children on screen, the effects of that will ripple out and influence so many other areas of our society. So let's cultivate a more diverse worldview, a more empathetic and understanding world for children and ourselves. And it starts at home. It's as simple as watching TV. Thank you.